So welcome to our HITRUST user group. We do this weekly, and the first meeting of every month, we try to do a presentation along with having time afterwards for questions and anything that's come up in your week for, anything HITRUST related. So we're very happy today to have Rick Lemieux, and I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Okay,
Yes.
perfect.
Hmm.
And so we're very lucky to have Rick today. He is one of the founding members of the DVMS Institute, and I will let you take it away. What we do in this format, because it is a discussion format, we're not here to sell. We're not here to
Hmm.
to step on anybody's toes. It's really for information sharing. Leave your camera on. Obviously, you, Rick, will leave your camera on because you're presenting for that part. But if you're not
Hmm.
comfortable with your camera on, that's fine. You can turn it off. But if you're speaking, we do ask, just so that we know name and face, who you are. Keep your session muted unless you are speaking. So Rick, we'll
Hmm.
mute ourselves after this. And if you're comfortable, you can put your LinkedIn profile into the chat window. And so I will, without further ado, let you take it away, Rick, and just introduce yourself, kind of your background and the introduction to the DVMS Institute.
Absolutely. Just in terms of full disclosure, I know Ryan pretty well. We've had a few discussions over the last few months, so just to make everyone aware of that. So, well, thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate that. Um, completely unexpected. I guess the blog was a big hit and got people's attention, and it hasn't stopped getting people's attention. I think it's up to 14,000 reads right now. It's just insane. Yeah, didn't expect that, but I'm glad it happened. But basically, I'm Rick Lemieux. I'm the co-founder of the DVMS Institute. I've been in the IT business for 45 years now, so I think I've seen about every possible transformation that has ever existed in the digital world, and I'm still doing it. I love doing it, and I'll continue to do it until I can't anymore. But I don't think that's happening anytime soon. We actually formed the institute. Well, we actually started the program itself under our other company. We have two companies, ITSM Solutions and the DVMS Institute. And the ITSM Solutions business was put in place to provide organizations with a way to adopt ITSM best practices, across their enterprise and supply chains and so on. So we've been helping businesses, solve specific problems around IT for a long time. Back in 2015, we were asked by the owner of the IDLE framework to build a curriculum for a new framework they were launching called Resilient. It was about organizational operational resiliency, way ahead of the curve. And so we ended up, meeting with a lot of our clients and prospects to understand, what should that look like? What should we be building? And at that time, it was nowhere near like it is now in terms of the threat landscape and what's happening across organizations and governments worldwide. So it was really just trying to figure out, okay, where are we now? Where are we going to go? And what should we build? And while we were doing that, we ran into the NIST cybersecurity framework, which was released by the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, because the government was becoming concerned that that the risk associated with these attacks was going to increase, and we needed a standardized approach for, at that time, the critical sectors to operate from, and now pretty much every business across the world. And so, we attended a session where they presented, the framework, and it was interesting to us, and we decided to begin building some curriculum around that particular framework. And as we realized that, while the framework was very, detailed in terms of the functions and the categories and subcategories that businesses needed to put in place to manage their risk, it really lacked, some prescriptive guidance on how to, operationalize that in the context of an overall business. So as we were building our curriculum, we not only looked at, how to teach organizations, how to look at the framework, and how to adapt it across their business, but we really took it one step further and looked at, how can we operationalize this where, it not only allows the organization to identify, classify, and mitigate its risk, but also how do we extend that to include, managing and enabling operational resiliency, as well as what we like to call, performance assurance, making sure that the digital business is delivering what it's designed to do and it's in alignment with the organizational strategy and so on and so forth. So as we were going through that exercise, that's where the DVMS was born. And so, we released a couple of classes first and kind of got the pipeline going and got, folks getting involved in it and taking the classes and giving us their feedback and very positive feedback. So we knew we were on the right track and we would continue to build out the curriculum to support that. And what we decided to do after the first release, and as we moved into the second release, was really start to write the body of knowledge. And that's where our publications were born. So we basically kind of created courses first, do a temperature check on the market, make sure we were heading in the right direction. Once we got that confirmation, then we went back to the drawing board and started to write the body of knowledge along with some additional courses to support that. So that's how the whole program got started. As we were diving into this world of risk and resiliency, we started to look at what do organizations have in place today to support that. In most cases, most organizations had deployed some level of best practices, mostly around IT service management, some DevOps or DevSecOps, and some things in the cybersecurity area. But it was kind of like hodgepodge. It wasn't really brought together as part of a system that will enable outcomes and so on and so forth. So we dug deep into that, and that's where we decided to design the DVMS as it's designed today. So any questions before I move on to the DVMS itself?
No, I think that's great background.
Okay, super. So the DVMS itself is built around a couple of different models. The first model is the ZX model. And what the ZX model is, it's basically 7 business capabilities that must be in place in order to manage risk and resiliency. So those 7 capabilities include governance and assurance. So you need to have a set of rules. You need to have measurements so you can measure whether you're meeting the outcomes that the rules are setting up for you. The ability to plan and design services, the ability to deploy those services, the ability to change those services, because change is kind of the new norm in business these days, and then the ability to innovate those services. All right, so it's basically the innovation piece is really critical because as an organization identifies the need for a change, and that's part of what the DVMS provides the organization, the information on what changes are needed and why they're needed. So it gives them the data they need to make decisions. And so the organization has to determine what type of change. And there's really 4 types of changes that an organization can go through, very simple change, an adaptive change, a substantial change, or a disruptive change. And as they select what type of change they need to go through, that determines, whether or not it requires a change in strategy and so on and so forth. So we provide, as part of the DVMS system, we provide all the data to the business to make those decisions. So the ZX model is then powered by the CPD model. And the CPD model is really how it gets implemented within the enterprise. And, it's a little bit challenging to cover this in the detail where I think everyone will understand it. And just so that everyone knows, there are videos on the website that you can go watch, which provide you all the details behind it. What the CPD...
Can I just jump in with a question? So,
sure.
And this is just a clarification question, really. So the ZX model, is that a security control framework, or is it a training workshop, or is it an approach, a methodology?
Yeah, the CPD model, the ZX model, and the other models I would describe are models that we teach. We're actually a training company, right? So we build curriculum and we teach organizations how to adopt and adapt, the DVMS system in the context of their enterprise. All right.
Okay.
And so what we do with organizations is our goal is we provide content and other services, but our goal is to equip enterprises with the skills to do these things themselves. So in other words, our goal is to get someone within an organization certified to deliver the training, not only in terms of what the training teaches, but also add to that, the context of the business they work for, right?
Okay. And is it training from a technical perspective, like how to implement NIST controls or whatever the framework is that they're working with, into their environment, or is it more about kind of philosophical approaches within the whole business organization?
No. It's basically teaching organizations how to select and adapt the controls that they select to meet,
Okay.
the requirements that they've set for their risk appetite. Okay.
Okay. All
So
right.
the first thing that happens in the process is an organization must do an assessment. Okay.
Mhm.
And that assessment allows them to understand where they're at, because that's the only place you can start
Yeah.
is where you're at. All right.
Yeah.
So they assess their controls, they assess their culture, they assess other capabilities, that
Mhm.
would be required to operationalize the DVMS. Once they complete their assessment, then they can build their plan or develop their
Mhm.
strategy and then build their plan for deployment. Okay. And then once the system is in place, the system will provide them with the information they need to make changes to that program based on
Okay.
changes in the internal threat landscape, the external threat landscape, and the threat landscape in general. So this goes
Okay.
back to, what we talked about as far as, being able to adapt to
Mhm.
changes in the landscape or changes into threats to your business.
Okay.
And so
Thank
we
you.
teach you how to build that system, and
Mhm.
then how do you leverage that system to go forward, with your program.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay.
I appreciate the clarification.
Nope, no problem. I probably didn't cover that part, and I probably should have. I wasn't sure what to expect today. I wasn't sure how the conversation was going to go, whether I'd be presenting or whether you'd be asking me questions and I'd be answering them, as best I could. So the CPD model, I kind of make it short, because the secret to the CPD model is 5 loops, right? And these loops allow you to implement the capabilities and then measure the output of the capabilities and identify any areas that need to be changed or updated in order to maintain those capabilities. So the 5 loops are: the first is the governance and assurance loop. All right. And this is, if you look at the CPD, it's the outer ring of the model. And it's really about, once again, looking at controls and verifying their capabilities. Are they delivering what they were designed to deliver? The inside loop is really tied to what they call strategy risk, and that's really tied to the organization's enterprise risk management model itself. All right. Okay, I think you just put it up. Okay.
Yeah,
And
is that
so,
helpful to have that up there?
yeah, I can barely see it, but I'm very
Okay.
familiar with it, so no worries. So
Yeah, and
yeah,
for everybody that joined after we started, the link to this blog post is in the chat window.
yeah. So the strategy risk is where we tie the digital risk program, if you will, to the enterprise risk management program. All right, that's really really important, because most organizations today look at risk through 2 different lenses. They look at enterprise risk through one lens and digital risk through another lens. And they need to look at them through the same lens, because most businesses today are, basically driven by some sort of digital engine. And so that's where this loop here allows you to look at that and to make sure that your digital risk program is aligned with your enterprise risk program. The third loop is the strategy governance loop. And this is where you establish, policies, off of the strategy that you develop, governance policies, right? That then get turned into management policies, into operational policies, and into business policies, right? And once again, everything that we do, that we enable in these loops, we're constantly measuring. So we know whether or not, adjustments need to be made based upon changes in the threat landscape. The next loop is the governance execution loop. This is where we, get into what I talked about just a second ago, and that is establishing management, operational, and business policies, and making sure that they're being executed correctly and being measured correctly. And then the last loop is the performance assurance loop. And this is basically making sure that what the strategic intent was is directly connected to the operational intent, operational capabilities, and that the business is performing at the level it needs to based on the strategy that was set up. So the diagram looks rather complex when you look at it. It's kind of a little bit overwhelming, but when you break it apart, it's basically a complex system that sits on top of a complex digital ecosystem. And that's the beauty of this. It's an overlay model. It's not a framework. So it basically allows the organization to leverage and use a lot of the capabilities it already has, and then to fill in the ones that it doesn't have, the closing out those gaps by putting those capabilities in place. So it's relatively straightforward. It's pretty easy to do once you completely understand it. And what we have found is students who go through our classes, when they get into the practitioner class, typically on day 3, you can see the dots start connecting in people's heads as to how this all comes together and the capabilities that it enables. A lot of people say that, I never really thought about it that way. And rightfully so, because it has never been presented that way. We're typically most organizations today are operating in the 20th century, using 20th century thinking to solve 21st century problems. And so this whole thing is allowing you to change the way you think about the problem and the way you solve the problem through the CPD model. The CPD model is then underpinned by 2 additional models. Right? The first is the 3D knowledge model. And a 3D knowledge model is basically designed to allow an organization to build communication and collaboration between silos. As you know, most businesses today are siloed and they don't really do a good job of communicating with each other. What the 3D knowledge model does is it allows for them to collaborate on governance, IT, risk, compliance, operations, and other business situations as well. So basically what it does is it allows everyone in the business to understand who they're dependent upon to get their job done, and who's dependent upon them to get their job done. And so it creates this constant stream of communications. And once again, that's also measured as well, so that if there's any breakdown in that, the organization can identify that and mitigate that. The last model is the fast track model. And what the fast track does is it's a phased approach to adapting all of these capabilities that I've just talked about here over the last few minutes. So it gives you the ability to start slow and then continually accelerate, to build out the program. The first thing we tell people is that, the first thing you need to do is build an incident response center, because if you have an incident while you're building out the rest of the capabilities, at least you have a way to deal with it. Where before, if you didn't have that capability, you'd kind of find yourself in a pickle. Then we talk about putting in place the basic hygiene controls as the initial start, basically prove, that you've got the ability to stabilize your environment, if you will, and then be able to optimize that environment by adding additional controls and capabilities that align with the strategy that you've set up for your organization. Now, what comes out of this at the end, as you put all these capabilities in place, is a system that is, got a holistic view of the business. It's basically provided you with an adaptable way to manage digital governance, right? Because remember, the governance is tied off of your strategy. You're building policies, you're building operational management and, business policies to support that. And if something changes that requires you to make adjustments to governance and then into, the programs that fall off of governance, this system gives you the capabilities to do that. Excuse me. As a result of this, one of the key things that we teach in the classroom is not only about all these control systems, but how to align the culture with the output that the controls enable. Culture is key to the success of this program. And it's key to the success of any program. If your culture is not aligned with your strategy and the outcomes that the strategy was designed to deliver, you probably won't achieve the outcomes. And so it's really important for the culture to be trained in being able to not only, understand how to create value, but how to protect that value at the same time, not think about it afterwards, and how to deliver that value and measure that value on a continual basis. So that's all part of the program that we teach as well. So that enables us to deliver the capability of operational resiliency. All right. And then, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, it's really about being able to, um, you know, measure your performance, to assure that performance goals are being hit. And if they're not, why not? And what can we do? What adjustments can we make to our program to get that back on track? All right. So just like, HITRUST does, and basically constantly reassessing, where you need to be as an organization to be compliant, with the framework, or to be certified that you're compliant with the framework. We're doing the same thing on the other side of the equation. We're helping the organization put in place the capabilities, realizing that, we don't live in a static world. We live in a world that is constantly changing. So we need to, constantly change with that through adaptation. And once you put these capabilities in place, when you go through your process to assess your environment, to then submit your results into HITRUST for certification, you should be pretty much where they are, because the two systems are doing the same thing. And hopefully you catch it at the time when they're both, pretty much doing it at the same level. And I guess that's what caught everybody's attention.
Rick, so I've got a question. It pertaining to how this, kind of supports and integrates with the HITRUST methodology, or whatever methodology somebody is choosing as far as security goes. How do you kind of fit the evidential aspect of this? Because we know that sometimes, companies have the best of intentions, they go forward, they're trying to do the right things and get the right elements in order. And depending on how big they are, there are different levels of circumstance that are, make sense for an organization. But one of the challenges that I frequently see with clients is they fall short on proving what they're doing. And that is such a challenge for them, because they feel like they went to the effort and they can't prove it the way they want to.
Yep, absolutely. That's the whole purpose of the CPD. Okay, the CPD basically puts in place the capabilities for you to prove everything that you're doing. In fact, the CPD won't deliver the outcomes that you're expecting, unless you enable all those capabilities. And this goes back to the cultural statement I made earlier. Part of the problem for people not to prove things is that the culture isn't there to support that level or that way of thinking. Okay. Some people think it's, writing something down on a piece of paper and stuffing it in a file cabinet. And that's because a lot of people are still operating with a compliance mentality. And when you're in a compliance world, it's a yes or no. Are you doing it, or are you not doing it? Yeah, I think we're doing it. So let's put yes, and then, that all worked great when we were living in a world of compliance, but we're not living in a world of compliance. We're living in a world of risk. And so the rules have changed. And the federal government, through the creation of the NIST framework, as one example, has changed those rules. In fact, if you look at every regulatory standard that has come out in the United States or anywhere internationally, so you're talking SEC rules, you're talking DORA, you're talking NIS2 in Europe, you're talking, SAMA in the Middle East, you're talking SACI in Australia. These in the UK is just about ready to release theirs. It basically says, you need to deliver these capabilities, and it's all built around organizational resiliency and adaptability. Right? You have to build these things, and you have to prove that you've built them and that you have the capabilities. So it isn't about, skipping off the paperwork and then only discovering it through the audit process. In fact, if you do this right, the internal auditing requirement ought to be relatively simple and straightforward, because you got a system that allows you to prove everything you need to prove on a continual basis. And so, for us, as we bring this into market, it's interesting because, people only know what they know, and they only do what they do. And so when you introduce something new like this, you get a little bit of resistance because it's not something they're familiar with. But what we found is once we put them through the training and they have that aha moment, the dots start connecting in their head, they realize this will make their life, their job a lot easier, and their company a lot better. And I think, part of the frustration is if you don't take care of the things that you need to take care of when you need to take care of them, and you try to take care of them on the back end, that's identical to, creating value and not protecting it, and only discovering the effects of not protecting it, a year down after you've launched it, and the recovery from that is more expensive than if you would have taken care of it right up front. So
Yep,
that's what we're
absolutely.
teaching
It's
people.
like getting a good doctor. You can have the best doctor in the world,
Hmm.
but if your nutrition and fitness is terrible, you're still
Hmm.
going to be in pretty poor health on average. It's not going to
Exactly.
stop you from getting sick just to have a good doctor.
No, it's true. And in the world we live in now, it is absolutely changing so fast
Yeah.
that you don't even have time to think about things. All right. So you really have to build the right mindset into your organization.
Mhm.
That goes for, not only all the things I've talked about, your culture, your leader, you know, I'll say this freely. We have a leadership problem in business today because
Mhm.
they've been able to get away with or work in the models they've been working in, because the world wasn't as dangerous as it is now. But it is
Mhm.
to the point now where companies can be destroyed very, very quickly. Governments can be destroyed. I mean, I won a contract with the state of California that took advantage of the monies that were coming out of the federal government to help state and local, governments become safe. All right.
Mhm.
And so I spent a lot of time meeting with the water districts. There are 1,200 of them in California. And some of them are one person operations, others are much larger, like, big cities like LA and San Francisco. And if you look at how they're structured and how they're run today, maybe that's one reason I left California, because I didn't think I was going to have water too long. Because if they were to get breached, it was going to be really, really bad. And so they're starting to address that now. They put in place capabilities, for those, water departments, cities and towns, places that could become catastrophic events. They're helping them get through that process of learning what they need to do to survive. And that's true in every business these days, and especially in the healthcare and all the critical sectors. That's those are things that we just need to survive as a human race.
So, question on this. I know you said the first thing that somebody should do is make sure they have an incident response plan so that if while they're going through this, one of the other things that I'm wondering is what if they, do they continue having a risk assessment process? Because one of the things, seeing the model go from GRC, governance, risk, and compliance, to governance, resilience, and adaptability, I was
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, so we don't need to worry about risk because we're going to already adapt into it, or how does that work in a
Yeah, well, you all the things I've talked about, you are outcomes of managing your risk. Okay. So if assessments will be a continual thing. Assessments are no longer, let's do them every year or every couple of years. You got to do them every day. You have to assess and reassess. And that's what the CPD does. The CPD is always measuring, the output, right? Understanding what's happening across those five loops. And it's informing the business that, well, we've got a problem here. And remember, the businesses are complex systems, right? And complex systems have a lot of, unique features to them, and you just can't break apart a complex system and try to fix one piece of it, because if you make an adjustment here, it may impact the other pieces of the complex system. So you really need to understand your system and understand its leverage points. And then once you identify those leverage points, that's where you can make changes to the system to allow it to deliver the outcomes that you want it to. Okay.
Okay. Well,
And,
and I
and
guess in a threat adaptive, because I mean that's one aspect of risk is, you've got your assets, your vulnerabilities, and your
mhm,
threats. So threat
mhm.
adaptive, you're taking care of that threat piece, and you're constantly, getting that input as far as here are the new threats that you may not have even thought about yet. Um,
Right.
what's
And,
what's taking care of any new assets? I mean, is that something you have to kind of add into this
yeah.
and just to make sure everybody understands, the CPD model is the create, protect, and deliver model. So
Right.
just
Exactly. Yeah. DVMS stands for digital value management. At the end of the day, we are creating value, we are protecting value, and we are delivering that value. That value is the asset. Okay. The technology that helps that asset get delivered is part of the equation. The people who are involved in it, part of the equation, the process, the management, all the other pieces of that puzzle all need to come together and operate as this complex system, okay? And be able to understand, when the system is out of whack and what changes need to be made to that system to recover and get back on track and deliver the outcomes that's expected. So that's the purpose is to create and protect and deliver the value, right? And getting every piece of the business, the people, the process, the technologies, the leadership, the culture, everything completely synchronized and moving in the same direction to deliver the output. So let me take a step back, because I know all of this sounds way overwhelming, all right? And it's really not when you break it apart into a couple pieces. Because what we teach in our class, there are two things we teach. First thing we teach is the NIST cybersecurity framework, because the NIST cybersecurity framework was created to provide businesses with a standardized approach to managing digital risk. All right. It has 6 functions. The first is governance, which I'm so glad they added it in, because I couldn't figure out how to do the rest if you don't have the rules. It doesn't make sense. But they did. And then they have the ability to identify, protect, detect, and respond and recover. Those are operational level capabilities that you need to have in your business to manage risk. All right. That's just hygiene as far as I'm concerned. Okay. So that's what we teach first. We help people get their head around the NIST framework at the functional level, at the category level, at the subcategory level. We teach them how to do an assessment so they can understand where they are, right? And going back to the fast track model, build your incident response center, set up your hygiene controls, and then add other controls to expand what we call your defensible perimeter, right? Real simple, really straightforward. They get to realize valuable outcomes as a result of taking that as their first step. That's a key step to, empowering the next step, which is really about the DVMS. All right. So in the DVMS, we teach them how to think at the systems level. Look at the entire business. All right. Now you're looking at the business side of cybersecurity, right? So you need to identify your assets, your digital assets. What value do those digital assets deliver to the customer and to the business? So you start to prioritize those assets and making sure that when you start to go through the execution phase of putting in place the other capabilities, that, those are the assets that, rise to the top of the list, and so on and so forth, right? So, and then you go through the cultural changes, right? And so you have to assess your culture. You have to understand where your culture is right now. What are the attitudes people have towards cybersecurity? A lot of companies have invested a ton of money, providing awareness training to employees, but never told them why they were doing it. So people would go through the exercise or get caught in the phishing test that they would throw out there, and then they put you through. They send you to training camp, and you have to learn why how to not do that again. That's the wrong way. You're not making them part of the solution. You're actually telling them they're the problem. All right. So you really got to work on your culture, and your culture has to be established at the leadership level, and then, curated through the leadership team, because people won't do it. If the boss isn't doing it, the rest of the team won't be doing it as well. So there's changes that have to take place in an organization.
I found that those cultural shifts, which are not easy to do, especially if an organization has been, historically about scolding and shaming people when they've made a mistake or done something bad. Now, different than a bad player internally, right? Different mistakes are fundamentally different. But I have found when it's reframed to be about protecting the business so that our jobs are protected and our clients are protected, and the relationships that we have with our clients and, in the ecosystem we operate in, when it's reframed about protection, what you're talking about in terms of repositioning that, it's absolutely unbelievable how much of a difference that makes, because then when everybody's involved in protecting, and it becomes everyone's responsibility, because that's what I used to tell people, it's not possible for 1 or 2 people to track everything that's going on in this company. So it's everybody's responsibility to protect and make sure that they are raising awareness and raising concerns where necessary to help protect the business. Not about, yes, sometimes investigations have to be done, but reframing it from the start to go, if you see something that might be a result of a mistake or something like that, and really going in with that gentle approach in the first instance, because otherwise people aren't going to report it.
Right. Yeah. It's to see something, say something. You know what I mean? Tell
Right.
us. You
Yes.
know, I put up a video on my LinkedIn account that was about Amazon and Amazon's approach to cybersecurity and cyber resiliency, and I was completely blown away because it's exactly what we teach. All right. So they have an incident, and so they teach everyone how to identify problems, right? And then they've got a program to report the problem. And then once they report the problem, this whole team comes together, including the president of Amazon, who gets involved in every single problem. Okay. And then they work it together as a team. This goes back to that 3D knowledge model. They have that set up within their environment and they work through it. And if you found the problem and you actually figured out the solution, you would get not only a nice note from the president saying thank you so much, but the entire company is told what you did and how you helped them save Amazon or save this particular business unit within Amazon. So you're right. It basically you're making people part of the solution, and people feel important about that. Like you said earlier, it's about protecting my job, right? It's about protecting my company so I have a job, right? And it allows you to open up a lot of new doors for yourself at the same time because you may have skills that the business didn't know you had until you found this problem. Now they want to put
Well,
you in another role, you know?
and there's also the benefit of the better you are at this at work, the better you're going to protect yourself and your
At home.
family at home. And
Mm-hmm.
so, that's another key thing to kind of lean into with these teams to say, look, because I know I've had people that go, oh my gosh, I thought I was being tripped up by something really, really hard. And I brought it home to my kids and they rolled their eyes and were like, well, duh. And, it's like, well, you can keep up with them, if you learn enough of this, and it's really about training, and it's an exercise. It's not a pass fail. It's not a test. It's an exercise,
Right.
and we'll only get better the more we do it.
I have to share this with you because when we first started this and we built the CPD and really started to bring together the whole program, I said to my partner, I says, listen, I'm going to call Glenn Taylor and I want to run this by him because, I respect his opinion. Now, just a little bit of history on Glenn Taylor. Glenn Taylor, when I was in the ITSM business, Glenn Taylor was the head of IT for Disney. And so he called me one day looking for one little tiny class. And he and I had a long discussion about that one tiny class. And it turned out that he had this covert operation going on inside of Disney to adopt best practices across the entire company. But he knew if he tried to do it across the entire company initially, it would never happen because the politics was so thick he couldn't get it done. So he set up a covert operation inside of the theme parks. So I worked with him on this, and he wanted to make it internal. He wanted internal delivery. So he says, I want to make 100 people on my team masters of this particular best practice. He says, so I want you to train them because I want them to train the rest of my department. And he says, and here's what the strategy is. Here's what we're going to do. And so we ended up doing it. He pulled it off. It was a great success. Once he was done, he exposed it to all the other divisions. They said, wow, this is great. We want to do the same thing, which is what his goal was. So when I went to him with this, I said, Glenn, I've known you for a long time, but you don't ever be afraid to tell me my baby is ugly because, I need to know the truth. So I've been into the presentation. I'm on slide 5. He said, stop. What's the matter? He goes, do you know what you have? And I says, Glenn, is that a good question or a bad question? He says, no, it's a good question. I says, no, tell me what I have. That's why I got you here. He says, you've solved the digital complexity problem. I says, wait, what does that mean? you know, he says, well, he says, what you just showed me is what's been floating around in my head for 20 years. He goes, digital is complex and it gets even more complex every day. And in a company like Disney, digital is all we do. We do everything digital. And he said, and by the way, after Glenn pulled off the first project, they then promoted him and made him the chief information security officer at Disney. So that's the role he was in when I presented this to him. So I said, well, how does that work at Disney? He says, well, Disney's built on three layers. You got an executive layer, you got a management layer, and you got an operational layer. He says, and those layers are broad. I mean, they cover a lot of ground. And he says, what you've done with CPD is you've established governance at each one of those layers, adaptable governance, right? That allows us to, through the 3D knowledge model, communicate with each other and then make the changes that we need to make in order to allow Disney to continually function. So I said, great, at least I know we're on the right path. And thank you for that great advice. And we run this by a lot of other folks as well. And like yourselves, they said, this is a great idea. How do we get leadership behind this? How do we get them moving forward? So I'm going to give you a little bit of a glimpse into the future. You can't say anything. This is all under non-disclosure. Are you recording? Oh boy, no.
Yeah, we're recording. So,
well, we're in the process
closer.
of building. We realize that the pathway to success, other than getting folks like yourself involved, is to get leadership on board quickly. And so we're building a simulation program right now, gamification simulation, that will allow the leadership team to experience the world of risk management in real time, in a real business. They have to make business decisions so they can see the results of their decisions. Okay. And we're pretty positive. We've used this platform before. We're just modifying it for the DVMS. But we're pretty positive that this will create the aha moment for them, and then for them to get behind putting together this program and pushing it downstream. Now, what we do in our courses, we teach the organization how to build the team, just like we taught Disney how to build the team to do that project I mentioned earlier. We do that with, in the context of the DVMS as well. So it's bringing together risk, internal auditing. In fact, the course teaches, the practitioner course, we teach it from the two different angles, from the implementation angle. So the implement is looking at it, is it fit for use within the organization? And through the auditor says, is it fit for purpose? Does it allow us to meet the regulatory requirements that are put in front of us? So you take the course, you learn both those things at the same time. We actually have 2 exams, so you can certify in both of them. But, the point is that, we're trying to take the leadership team, to where they need to be, so they can kick off the program and then let the program propagate through the organization and provide them the capabilities to do that. We're also developing an assessment platform that will allow the organization to assess 3 things. They assess their culture, which is key to this program, to assess their capabilities all around what I mentioned earlier, those minimum viable capabilities. Most businesses have those things in place today, but they're not organized in a way to deliver the outcomes that I talked about. Okay. The third is skills. Do you have the skills to support the program? And how do you create a skills inventory? Because that skills inventory, just like your control systems and your culture, need to evolve and need to adapt continuously, especially with things like AI and quantum computing coming into play, new risks that we don't truly understand yet. Okay. So it's really about making sure that those 3 wheels of the organization, you understand where they are today, you understand where they need to go, and you understand how to get them there.
So using the simulation techniques and some of the other things you've just mentioned, like the skills inventory, are you able or going to be able to customize and curate, say, tabletop exercises that would deliberately poke holes at the weak spots in someone's organization? Because I think that's one of the biggest challenges. It's mind-numbing sometimes to watch organizations have just the IT or tech folks sitting at a table doing tabletop exercises for the same basic exercises, which means they're never getting out of their comfort zone. They're not actually preparing for things that they have gaps on. They're just preparing for the things they're already prepared for.
Yeah, exactly. No, you've hit the nail on the head. Because what we're doing with the simulation product is not only we're going to build a round or 2 for the executives just to get them over the hump, but the program has 6 rounds that we play in the game. And the game is actually going to be integrated into the courses. So all the exercises are all based on gamification. So you're going to be doing tabletop exercises right in the classroom. Okay. And so we'll probably end up, we have three products. We have an awareness product, and that trains it goes back to what I said earlier. That trains everyone in the organization on the fundamentals of digital. We assume everyone knows what digital is. Most people don't. We talk about risk associated with digital. We talk about the NIST framework, why it was created, and what its role is within an organization. We talk about what is your role as an individual. How do you see something, say something? How do you become part of this team that we talked about earlier? The foundation product program is for those who actually play a role in the development of the program, building the business case for the funding of the program, and actually be involved in the program on an ongoing basis, like your internal auditing team, your legal team, your financial team, and so on. And then the practitioner is based on NIST 853, which is, for those of you who don't know, that it's the Bible of security and privacy controls. Everyone that's ever been thought about are in 853. So we basically teach people how to adopt and adapt the controls, from 53 into their organization. And some may only need a couple if they're small businesses, and others may need a lot more if they're a larger business, and so on. So those are really the three main programs. Each one of them has a publication that comes along with it. We just released our third publication, Thriving on the Edge of Chaos, which is a holistic approach to organizational cyber resilience. This is where we talk about the culture, how to get your culture in shape, and how to get it done in a way that people want to be part of it. All right, and so we've had a lot of smart people involved in putting this together. A lot of psychiatrists, psychologists, I think every other psychologist I can think of. Making sure we didn't think about this the wrong way. We had a woman who actually works with the military in the UK, helping them, develop strategy, for, generals and so on and so forth. And it's just really interesting to hear how that all gets done, and how it somewhat relates to, what we're doing, and in fact, she wrote the forward in the new book. But so this is really kind of just getting out of the gate. We actually have a lot of customers. A lot of customers have been through the phase one, the adoption of the NIST framework. The UK government is standardized on the whole thing. Every ministry in the UK government is putting people through this training, and any contractor who works with the government has to go through the training, which is kind of funny because this was created in the United States, and they have yet to fully adopt it. But all the other countries in the world, they said, "Thank you very much. This is great." So we're starting to see, more and more people start to get ready for phase two and start to put in place the capabilities to support that.
That's excellent. Anybody else have any other questions for Rick? I know that simulation, as soon as you said that, I was like, oh yeah, I can imagine some executives that would love that, round one or two. And to Donna's point, to not have to be the person that's creating that, but to have, here's a standard that, if this happened tomorrow, as opposed to trying to pull it from headlines and get it, but to have it in that safe space to be able to kind of, kick the tires and,
Yep.
Now this went wrong, now that went wrong,
Yep, because it's like you said, they have the desktop exercises and the technical side of the business. They've been doing that for a long time. They figured that one out a long time ago, but no one's figured out how to do the business side of this stuff. Okay, and so that's where this is really exciting for us, because we kind of did a little bit of this in the ITSM world, because we used to. We had simulation products there that would allow them to see IT in action. You know what I mean? And, not just theory, but you're the service desk manager. You're the head of the network group. You're the head of the desktop group, and you got to make decisions in real time based upon changes that are happening in the business, the network's down, or whatever the case might be. So this is really about even much more strategic thinking. Where if I don't make an investment in protecting the value of this business, I might not have a business tomorrow. And once I get to you look at United Healthcare, $2 billion to recover from that, that attack that took down their ability to process, prescriptions.
Yeah.
Horrible.
But it's also looking at the non-digital situations and occurrences which can impact digital. So, for example, on your technology team, how many of those people know each other and are friends and might go out drinking together? Just throwing it out there. I have, executives who are really good friends, and they'll fly together for different events all over the world. And I cannot tell you how many times that I've asked them not to fly on the same plane because they are
Yeah.
C-suite
Yeah.
executives.
It's a risk.
And that would be a really big, they're both on the technical side of things, and it would be a very big impact, especially prior to my being able to actually extract all the information from their heads. And I
Yeah.
won't say that, that has been 100%, it almost never is. But, it's looking at those types of things and then having tabletop exercises that step outside of the we might be hacked world. Not that it's not good to consider hacking and breaches and other things, but there are other, situations which can absolutely radically impact, the security of systems. If you don't know how to
Yeah.
deal with something, then what happens then? Or like if you go way back
Mhm.
into situations where they'll have a street situation where somebody will have an ailment and fall or faint. And in the meantime, somebody's going around and picking the pockets, right?
Yeah.
So put that in the digital scheme. And
Yeah.
if somebody were to, a C-suite executive were to have an accident that was maybe a little bit more orchestrated than anybody realized, and then the digital world comes around. And I don't think we're far off from really seeing some of those things come to fruition. And
Oh,
I don't know that companies are paying attention the way they should.
no, they're not. I mean, there's one real world situation happened a few months ago where the chief financial officer got a request for a payment for $1 million to a company. And she thought it was kind of suspicious. So she
Mm.
decided to put together a meeting with all the executives who were involved. And what she had going on was a man in the middle. So the man in the middle, who had sent the original request, said, "Okay, you want to have a meeting?" He went out through AI and created a representation of all the leadership team, and obviously their voices, and basically had a Zoom call with the CFO and said, "Yeah," and she thought they
Yeah,
were
go
real
ahead, wire
people.
the money. Yeah.
Go ahead,
I
wire
remember
the
that
money,
was Hong Kong. Yeah, it was Hong Kong
yeah,
that happened
and
a
she
couple of years
did.
ago.
So it's all about trust, but to your point earlier, you know, once you're trained on how to think about risk, everything is a risk to you. Okay. And no, seriously, I drive my poor wife crazy. I mean, I can't go to the store without like
Yes.
scanning it out, going, okay, here are the risks, She'll
Mhm.
stop. I said, no, this is real world. We got to deal with it. But it's true because I think, and that's where once you take people to that point, you take the company to that point, company's got a great chance of success. But it has to start at the top and work its way
Mhm.
down. I think most organizations are willing to invest in the NIST framework, which is kind of why we started there, because what the government wants to do is create standardization so they can measure and see what's working and what's not working and what else they can do to help make it work. Right.
Mhm.
And then they even need to take that one step further up to the level, that the DVMS enables and so on. And then, we have a whole global economy that we deal with that everyone's kind of operating with slightly different approaches. But when you sort them all out at the end of the day, they're all pretty much the same. They just say it differently. But what they're looking for you to enable and the outcome they're looking for you to deliver are pretty much the same.
Yeah, and I can see
Well,
adapting this into a high trust model because high trust is much more prescriptive than NIST, but there is
mhm.
mapping to it. So
Mhm.
going through that training and understanding NIST and then going back to a high trust and going, oh, okay, well, now how can I apply this? And it's really almost like high trust is then kind of giving you the answers for a lot of these. Well, this is how this is the control you're going to implement as opposed to NIST going, hey, implement something that will handle this. So
Right.
I can
See,
see this being kind of a natural fit.
yep. That's been my belief from the beginning, which is one of the reasons I started talking to Ryan and a few other folks,
Hmm.
Mhm.
because high trust is a maturity model. Okay. I mean, CMMC is a maturity model. C2M2 is a maturity model. Right. So that's what you're being measured against. All right. So and if they do it using an adaptive threat model like high trust, which I agree with, by the way, I think it's a great that's
Mhm.
perfect. Okay. But that means you got to be adapting as fast as they're adapting up here. So you have to have a way to bring those two worlds together. Right.
All right.
And so, and that's where I see the benefit and the value. Because it's funny, people are afraid of auditors. They're afraid of assessments, and they're afraid because they don't know what the outcome's going to be. And
Mhm.
so how would it feel if you were in control of the outcome because you built the system that shows you the outcomes, right? And that's where we need to get to. And it's not an easy road, trust me, but that's where we have to get to, because the threat model, the threat landscape is just horrific, and we just don't know. That's why Amazon, last thing Amazon wants to see happen is a catastrophic event, or they call it a systemic risk. There's a great book, by the way. I got it here on my desk. If you get a chance, you should buy this book. It's called The Great Reboot. If you haven't read it yet, this is the second edition. And this book was about, it says here, succeeding in a complex digital world under attack from systemic risk, right? When they wrote edition 1, there weren't any really major systemic events happening. This volume 2 has about 30 of them. You know what I mean? So what they said was going to happen has actually happened. And they talk about, a lot of the DVMS concepts in that book as to what we teach and how we teach it, and so on. So that's where we're heading. And that's where we got to get ahead of this.
Nice. Well, that kind of reminds me, the Great Reboot reminds me of PearlHarbor.com that Win Shorto had created years and years ago, that book about a catastrophic cyber failure. So, well, this has been very, very good. Thank you so much, Rick. I really appreciate you coming on and chatting with us today.
No problem at all. And just for everyone on the call today, as I mentioned to you, Susan, I'm more than happy to provide all of you with a copy of the new book, Thriving on the Edge of Chaos.
Nice.
It's one of the best books I've ever read. I feel really personally attached to it since they dedicated it to me.
Nice.
But that's my two partners who I've been in business with for a long time. So it was fun to watch them put this together. But I think it will just further elaborate, the points that we made today, and I think it will provide you guys some good guidance on that area. So you can just send me the list of the emails. I'll make sure I'll send you out a PDF copy, just as long as you don't share it. That's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So if anybody, I know Blake and Stephen, I have your emails. Rick, you probably have Ryan already.
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Yep.
And then I think we're down to 7. So that'll work. So we will definitely send you the emails.
Great. Thank you very much for inviting me today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Rick, it's been a pleasure having you on our meeting today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any last minute questions for HITRUST, questions that they were desperate to ask this week? Just throwing it out there in case anybody showed up with a burning question.
Well, here, let me share this. So, Rick, while your wife might be, maybe a little irritated with you because you're paranoid, just because you're paranoid, it doesn't mean that they're not out to get you.
So true. So true. All right. And on that, we will regroup next week. So thank you so much. Appreciate it. And Rick, you're welcome anytime.
All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Right.
Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
See ya.